Okay. Navneet, we are live?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening, all of you, and welcome to this webinar on a non-urological subject. We are having the second wave of COVID, so we thought we'll have a chat with the expert and also get to know of what is in store for us for the second wave and what would be our practice patterns. India had its first COVID case on 30th January, and we are more than a year now, and we had seen only in the first wave close to 10 million cases with 150,000 deaths. But you see, now we are rapidly going up in the second wave, and everybody is terribly occupied with only this COVID. So the urological practice would definitely come down. But how to practice and what is the implications of this second wave on our practice? We wanted to hear from the specialist. So I had requested Dr. Ganesh Kamath, and he was kind enough to invite Dr. Suresh Kumar, who is there amongst us today, to share his views and also to discuss about the second wave of COVID. He is a very busy consultant at Chennai. Dr. Ganesh would introduce to him. So without wasting time, I would now request Dr. Mallikarjun to give his opening remarks, and then I would introduce the panelists. Over to you, Dr. Mallikarjun.
Thank you, Keshav. Thank you. I think that was apt. Anil's email stimulated us to look into this. Thanks, Anil Ellens, on this suggestion to understand COVID in a different perspective this year. I still remember the last year we had a different perspective of understanding COVID. We were new to it. We were protecting ourselves, how to protect ourselves, how to protect the patients. Everything was being discussed at length for first 2 to 3 months. I can still remember vaguely all those things. But now we know all those things. We have some different kind. It's there everywhere else. How we need to go about now with some amount of remedial measures which are already in place and some protocols being discussed regarding the treatment aspects. If you are, we can see many urologists in our society have been infected with the COVID and they have recovered. Many have recovered and still some are recuperating, I think. So I wish them a speedy recovery, and hopefully that the rest of the urologists will develop some sort of a subclinical infection and immunity against COVID so that they don't suffer in future. Thanks, Dr. Suresh Kumar, for giving this opportunity because they're all infectious disease consultants are absolutely busy. They don't have even time to sleep. That's what I was being said every time. Ganesh has been kind enough to get some time of Dr. Suresh Kumar. Thank you very much, sir, for this. Over to Keshav.
Thank you, Dr. Mallikarjun. This session would be moderated by Dr. Ganesh. Ganesh Kamath does not require introduction. He is the Chief Urologist at the Sundaram Medical Foundation, Chennai, and also currently the President of the Association of Southern Urologists. He would be moderating the session, and we have 3 urologists as the panelists: Dr. Anil Ellens from Meerut, Dr. Haresh Thuma from Baroda, and Dr. Harpreet Singh from Jamshedpur. They would be coordinating with Ganesh regarding the discussion, and they would be answering questions also pertaining to urology practice. And I would request Dr. Ganesh to introduce the speaker and moderate this session. Over to you, Ganesh.
Thank you, Keshav, and good evening, friends. I'm thankful to USI for inviting me to moderate the session. As healthcare workers, we're often asked by our family, friends, and patients, what's the best vaccines? Do masks protect against airborne transmission? What is this third variant? And finally, the most well-informed amongst us will be very uneasy to answer these questions. And in the present climate, we find theories, counter theories, evidence, and non-evidence coming along. So we bear the responsibility of not only staying current, but also we have the responsibility of using this evidence to protect ourselves, our family, our friends, and the patients who come under our care. Under the initiative of USI, we are fortunate to have the time of Dr. Suresh Kumar, who is an ID specialist in Chennai. Is my screen visible? Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, Dr. Suresh Kumar is a physician and with a subspecialty of infectious diseases. As you're aware, he has won several awards and also presented national and international publications. His special interests are in tropical infections, ICU fevers, STD, TB, and HIV. I have the good fortune of obtaining his wise counsel in many critically ill patients with urosepsis and thus recently even with a COVID active emphysematous pyelonephritis. I now invite Dr. Suresh Kumar to deliver his talk.
1 second.
This is understandable now because he's an extremely busy physician.
Oh, no, sir. I said put my in flight mode there. Sorry. Otherwise, calls keep coming there. I'll just start sharing my screen there. My slides are visible now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, God. I thought I'm visible there.
Are you sharing the screen?
1 second, sir. I tried again. I shared, but some difficulty. Now is it visible, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Put it on full screen mode. Yeah.
Yeah, I put it there. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for the opportunity, and I sincerely thank Dr. Ganesh Kamath for inviting me for this talk, as well as Urological Society giving for this wonderful opportunity there. I'll keep my presentations at bare minimum so that we can have a good discussions at the end there. Okay. So I'm going to face tough questions from you because everybody is facing the tough questions from not only from the patients, also from the COVID, as well as from the other consultants here. I'm not in a Zoom dress code, definitely. I'm in a full dress code, so I can stand any point of time and answer the questions also there. Thanks for the opportunity there. So this is a question I am facing now. One of the hospitals, they are planning renal transplant on 24th of this month. So they're creating, the month of September, October, they did some renal transplant. They're saying this is a bubble concept. For example, IPL, everybody knows the team should stay together. They should not deviate. They should not go out. They should not mingle with the family and friends there. So that is called the bubble concept. They should stay within the bubble. Similarly, they are creating a transplant bubble there. They are operated in September and October. That time, everybody knows the COVID has came down. So now they are planning to do the same bubble concept in April 24th. They're trying to do it there. COVID PCR for both donor and recipient is negative. Urologist, nephrologist, anesthesia, anesthetist, OT nurse vaccinated, and post-vaccinations IgG is also positive. No fever, no cough, no taste or smell disturbances to anyone, both operating team as well as patients and donor. So what do you think there? Please go ahead and put in the chat column so that we can discuss. Form the transplant bubble. Everyone stay within 1 week within the hospital. Operating team, nurse, housekeeping staff. That's what they did in September and October. But it's not a perfect bubble to me there because doctors cannot stay, urologists cannot stay within a particular room there. They need to go and see other patients they operated. They stayed within the hospital, but they went and operated other patients. They went and saw other patients and came back. But they call this is a bubble in that hospital. Do transplants as a regular one. There is no need to do some bubbles and everything there. Ensure good mass adherence and minimal visitors or even no visitors. You can do video consultations or complete 2 doses of COVID vaccines for everybody and start proceeding or call me. So what is your choice of preferences when you plan to do renal transplant or any urological surgery? What is the concept you are following in 2021 April when the second wave started hitting hard? Please go ahead and give 30 seconds for you people to think what you are thinking there, or any other choices also you can put it there. This is not a fixed one. It is open to everybody there. But this is a plan they are having it there. They want to form a bubble there. That's what they call me. We are creating a bubble. Or okay, I had a different discussions for the thing there, but you just think about it there. Good. Lot of people are awake at 8 p.m. Good. Yeah, see some of the references there. Okay. So we underestimated COVID-19 second wave. See, that is a economical times paper. Only country with single peak. This paper published in the month of February or late part of February, I remember there. India, they claim India is a country with only one peak. All other countries has got double peak. India is a country with only one peak. They predicted in February there. Soon when the February was over, we also got a second peak there. So that time, if you see the Indian graph, it went up, came down nicely. Everybody thought the peak is over. COVID is gone, bye-bye. But we lost a lot of warriors in the wave 1 itself there. But fortunately, in wave 2, we not lost that much. We lost couple of doctors and couple of consultants were affected, not like wave 1. compared to wave 1, wave 2, lot of doctors and lot of consultants, they are safe, probably vaccinated, probably got infected and recovered from wave 1. We do not know. But gross underestimations of wave 2, nobody predicted. That is why we are suffering. We thought India is a different country. We are not going to get the wave 2. That is a problem we thought. So people thought we got herd immunity. They periodically check the zero epidemiological studies. ICMR started conducting zero epidemiological studies from last year onwards. Every year they're doing the study, 10% of population is infected, 30% of the population is infected, 40%, 50%. That means we are close to the herd immunity. According to the latest survey, 56% of the Indian population got infected in Jan. That is the last survey. December, Jan, they conducted a survey. They told almost 55 to 60% of Indian populations is affected with COVID. So COVID is going to go away. We are almost close to the herd immunity target, and we start vaccinating in the month of January 2021. So the remaining 15%, 20% of herd immunity, we are going to get with vaccine. That's what the thought process was there. But if you see the Brazil experience, Brazil got 70% zero epidemiological study in June itself, June 2020. They got first wave hit April, May. They did the zero epidemiological study in Brazil that showed 76% of the population has got immunity. But what happened in Jan? They got December, Jan, 6 months later, they hit hard. Compared to the first wave, the second wave, if you see the upper graph, the second wave is a bigger one. Compared to the wave 1 in the month of April, May, the wave 2 is a bigger one. They faced it, they got 76% epidemiological studies there. So what it indicates, whatever positivity rate, the immunity is slowly wearing up, or the new mutants is emerging. For example, Brazil has got new variant, P1 variant we call, because of the variant or because of the epidemiology is gone down, or because of the poor adherence of mask. We do not know what made the second wave big, but we never learned from Brazil experience in Jan. Brazil has got the problem in December and Jan. We are very casual at that point of time there. Then what will happen to COVID? People predicted in the 2023 prediction there. First wave will be bigger, and small waves will happen in 2 years or 3 years. That's what the predictions initially. Or one wave, bigger wave, sufficient time, second will happen, but second will again small one there. Initially, we thought the third pattern, only 1 peak. Afterwards, there is no infections at all. That's what our prediction still Jan, Feb 2021. But unfortunately, this predictions, everything is failed. The first wave is small, the second wave is larger. How large is going to happen, we do not know. But the rate with which is climbing, the rate at which the COVID is climbing now, it may be much bigger than the first wave, because the climb is very fast. Maybe within another 3 to 4 weeks, maybe come down, because we are seeing 3 lakh odd people infected. That means tested people. 10 times we need to think about it, number of people who are infected there. They're not coming for testing, or the test is not picking up, or they're not recognizing. So minimum 30 lakh people per day is infected there. If you calculate 30 lakh people per day, by May end or June first week, probably the wave will come down soon. That's a prediction there. So if you see the second wave, compared to the first wave, the wave is much bigger. We are the first country reporting more than 3 lakh cases so far in COVID. No other country has been reported. We have reported more than 3 lakh cases for the last couple of days there. It is taller than first wave. And what is more important, the ICUs are stretched. For example, the Nagpur and as well as Nasik area, if you see, the ICU is overburdened like anything there. Maharashtra is hit hard. Not only the ICU bed, ventilators, as well as problem of oxygen itself is a problem in Maharashtra belt there. Not only the Maharashtra belt, every state is now facing the trouble now. Delhi, in South Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, everywhere are facing the problem, facing the heat there. Particularly the ICU is stretched. For example, I'm getting a bed for a young boy, 30-year-old boy, recently married, 2 months, requiring NIV support. There is ICU beds are there, but there is no NIV machines available for him. I'm searching for the last 2 to 3 days for different hospitals, but none of the hospitals is having sufficient support to take this guy to promote it there. In fact, people are talking about New York model and Italy model. We don't want to ventilate anybody above 80. We don't want to ventilate anybody above 75. We just want to ventilate patients below 50, 55, 60. That's what people are talking now last week or so. This is a message I'm getting from my intensive care colleagues there. So the ID specialists, they asked for an interview. What will happen to the pandemic? Because of the wave predictions, everything there. Almost 60% of ID doctors have told Corona is not going to go away. Corona is going to stay with us. Not only this year, it's going to stay with us for quite some time. That is the ID doctor's prediction there. because the variants emerging there, and people are not vaccinating as much as frequently. So people are not vaccinating as frequently. And second thing, variants are emerging, and mask adherence, physical distance is not maintained at all there. So with these predictions, I don't think so Corona is going to go away in 2021. It is going to stay, but not this magnitude. What the magnitude we are facing, this is not the magnitude we are going to face, but small amount of Corona is going to stay away for next couple of years. Then is there any difference in the presentation? Is there any differences in the presentations from wave 1 to wave 2 compared to some of the news channels? Some of the news channels are saying that some of the skin lesions are quite common. But as far as me is concerned, both old strain, wave 1 as well as wave 2, the presentation is similar. People are losing taste, people are losing smell, cough and chest pain and breathlessness is there. But what is more important, this time the target group is 30 to 45 years there. Not like you are 65, 70 plus what we have seen in the wave 1, but we are seeing more sick patients between 30 and 45. That is the thing we are seeing now. And people start requiring 2 to 4 liters, and suddenly the oxygen requirement keep growing. Particularly when the beds are not there, morning they're asking, doctor, 2 liters oxygen is needed, can I get a bed? I'm saying that I'm discharging a couple of patients, they're going by evening, you come in the evening time. By evening time, when I ask them to come back, they're saying, doctor, right now he's requiring 8 to 10 liters of oxygen. He preferably to stay in ICU or HCU bed, not in a ward bed. So young people are affecting this time more. Oxygen requirement is rapidly progressing for a couple of young people there without any comorbids, basically. That is one thing. And so far in our ICU, we asked the people whether you completed 2 doses of vaccinations, whether 2 weeks is over after the vaccinations. Most of the people in ICU, they never completed 2 doses and they never completed 2 weeks after the second dose. That is a good news to you people there. So people taken 2 doses of vaccinations and 2 weeks has been completed. Most of the people, they're not reported in ICU. They may be in the hospital ward side because of the fear or some amount of symptom it is there. That is a good news for people who are vaccinated there. Then how about the diagnosis? A lot of point of care test diagnosis is available there. I'm not talking about the rapid antigen. I'm not talking about the pulse oximetry, 6 minutes pulse oximetry, that is diagnosis. This is called isothermal amplification method. Even though I've shown a picture of antigen test, but isothermal amplifications, that is a small machines, point of care, keep in your OT or keep in your OP itself. Each patient so you can do test, positive results within 5 minutes you can get the answer. This is isothermal, similar to your RT-PCR. This is approved by ICMR, but we need to have some formal recommendations from your state department there. ICMR has approved the thing there. Negative reports within 10 to 15 minutes. Suppose you are planning something there, point of care test is available right now. Second thing, people go with the CT scan. I'm thinking CT scan, if it is normal, the person may be in early stage of disease. Either day 1, day 2. People, once they know symptoms started, immediately they're going to the CT scan. If you do the CT scan on day 1, day 2, day 3, most of the times the CT is normal. If the CT repeated or CT done on day 5, if it is normal, the chances of COVID is either unlikely or the chances of severity is unlikely. So don't rush and do the CT chest. Even though CT chest suggests you of ground glass opacities, don't go by the diagnosis the person has got COVID. Only for respiratory isolations, for technical decisions, you can rely on CT chest. And CT chest has got good negative predictive value. On day 5 to day 7, if the CT chest is normal, clinical presentation is vague, chances of COVID is very unlikely. That's the conclusions I can make. People want to do CRP, CPK, ferritin, D-dimer. Usually we go by clinical diagnosis there. When the person sitting in front of me, giving a proper history without completing, he is able to complete 2 or 3 sentences without any stop. There is no cough while giving the history, and the person's saturation is good. Even after 5 to 7 minutes of walk, the saturation is maintaining. There's no drop. Probably the person is safe. Don't go with the D-dimer. Don't go with the CRP. People start treating the CT scans. People start treating D-dimers. People start CRP there. But we as an ID, we never give anything there. They are looking at us there. We are the rare species. They're talking about it there. We are not treating all these things there. Then now the new confusion is antibodies. Whether based upon this antibody, whether I can decide whether the person is non-infectious or not. How to go about non-infectious? Time from the date of onset of the symptom. If the person is not requiring oxygen from the date of onset of symptoms, after 10 days, he is not going to be infectious to other people. Suppose if the person requiring little bit of NIV or the person requiring BiPAP or CPAP or NIV machines, because of the forceful air, 1 or 2 viruses may present in the throat. it may splashes out is possible. So the person requiring high amount of oxygen, 14 days is a timeline. Without oxygen or nasal oxygen, 2 liters, after 10 days of onset of symptoms, the person is non-infectious. The person requiring little bit of higher amount of oxygen, particularly forced oxygen, 14 days is a timeline. Suppose you say the person is a post-renal transplant, immunosuppressed forced. What do you think about it? Maximum 20 days. After 20 days, we are not keeping the patients in a COVID isolation area. We remove to the non-COVID area. The person does not require oxygen, we remove to the non-COVID area on day 10. Similarly, on day 14, we remove to the non-COVID area, the person requiring NIV support. This IgM and IgG, the problem, IgM also remained positive for quite long time. IgG also remained positive for quite some time. And whatever IgG we are measuring is a total IgG. Some other laboratory claiming I am measuring neutral antibodies. Actually, to measure the neutral antibody, plaque reduction assay is a method. Unfortunately, none of the hospitals is doing it. It is a very tedious process according to microbiologists. It's not a simple forward procedure. But most of the labs claiming I'm doing neutralizing antibody, I'm checking spike antibody. Whatever we are measuring is a total IgG. Within the total IgG, neutralizing antibody may be there, but it's very difficult to measure clinically at this point of time. So don't go by with IgM and IgG. This is useless to me there. That's most important thing. So how to diagnose COVID in 2021? These are all the risk factors. Travel by bus or train. Most of the people getting infections because traveling in a closed environment, air conditioned thing there. Meetings and gathering happening in a air conditioned room again. Staying in a hotel, taking a food in a hotels, restaurants and buffet dinners. Visited hospital, that is the most important thing there. People are visiting hospitals, people are visiting scan centers, particularly antenatal women. They are spending sufficient time in antenatal scan centers. They are getting infected. People visiting dental clinic, hemodialysis, they are getting infected there. And sick family members or friends, that's most important. Along with sudden onset of fever, sharp onset of fever, back pain, tiredness, lack of taste, lack of smell, loss of appetite. Any permutations combination is possible. With significant history, with these two factors, straight away put your money on COVID. Don't think about CT test, don't think about COVID PCR there. Then as far as the treatment is concerned, what is working? Only 3 things is working. When a person requires oxygen, hypoxia, oxygen is working, saving the patient. Despite giving oxygen, the saturation is not picking up. Dexamethasone is working, but people want to use methylprednisolone and everything there. Data shows dexamethasone 6 milligram to 8 milligram. That's a dose we need to give. Then what else is working? Despite dexamethasone, if the oxygen is not improving, tocilizumab may work there. So these 3 things only has got good evidence. Oxygen, dexamethasone, tocilizumab. Prevent ventilations, prevent death. What prevents the death? What is the role of remdesivir? People talking about remdesivir short supply. Remdesivir is sinking. We know azithromycin synced, hydroxychloroquine synced, ivermectin sinking, and everybody is sinking there. So people talking about remdesivir. Remdesivir cut down your hospital stay by 1 day. It won't prevent mechanical ventilations. It won't prevent death. It can cut down your symptoms by 1 day according to data. WHO data, Solidarity data shows no benefit for remdesivir. So don't rely more on remdesivir there. So this is a current data. What are the things saving? IL-6 inhibitor like Tocilizumab saving the life. Dexamethasone saved the life. Colchicine in OP settings may got role, but there is no large randomized control trial for colchicine. So this is what people are using nowadays there. So what is the natural history? 85% to 90% of the people, they go home with COVID. There's no need to get panicked, no need to tense. Only 5 to 10% of the population is going for it. Who are all the populations? Still last year we can say 60 plus, but now 30 to 45, diabetic, obese individual. These type of people can go for complications or like, but still we do not know. We need to look for our data. Some of the young people without any comorbids also going for the complications. We need to reassess the data. This is a wave 1 data only I'm putting it now. So the treatment, what we need to do, patients requiring ICU care, all 3 can be given: oxygen, dexamethasone, tocilizumab. People doesn't require oxygen, nothing there. We can enroll in good trials. Clinical trial, fluoxamine, colchicine, or budesonide inhalations. Budecort, we can call that inhalations can prevent the progression there. So these are all the things we try as a trial basis, not as approved therapy, because there is no RCT to back my data. That's the problem. What about COVID vaccines? Which vaccine is better? People keep on asking there. So this is the efficacy data. For example, Pfizer and Moderna has got 94% efficacy. Sputnik similar to 94% efficacy. AstraZeneca 70 to 85%. Our Indian vaccine, Covaxin, is similar to your Sinovac, Chinese killed vaccine. That is equal to 50 to 60%. The cutoff is 50%. This is efficacy, but it won't prevent infection. It prevent death. It prevent ventilations. It prevent ICU stay. People who have taken 2 doses, 2 weeks completed. I never seen a patient in ICU after 2 weeks of 2 doses of complete vaccinations, whether Covaxin or Covishield. They have never been in hospital there. So vaccines, what is the benefit? It prevent ICU, it prevent mortality, it prevent ventilations. People who completed 2 doses and 2 weeks is completed there. So which is one best one? I can say one simple word: love marriage and fixed marriage there. At the end of marriage, both is similar to me there. Before the marriage, only these things is better. Whether this completed phase 2 trial, phase 3 trial, this is not completed. Now both the things is completed. So one is a love marriage, other is an arranged marriage. Both are same after the marriage. So both are same, both are effective, both are preventing deaths. So this is the latest data provided by ICMR. People who are taken 1 shot, their getting positivity rate is very high. People taking 2 shots, the positivity rate is bit low. I'm saying this is not 100% protective. Still you get infected, but the chances of going to the hospital, going to the ICU, going to the death is less likely. That's most important thing there. In fact, the CDC data shows the chances of going to the ICU is 0.00056, even better with the mRNA vaccines there. Then I'll come to the prevention part. So far, what we learned from wave 1 to wave 2. In wave 1, people talk about fomites. They are not allowing anybody. They didn't touch anything, the newspaper, money, anything. When anybody's coming with some items they don't want to touch for 2 days, they kept everything in outdoors. But now it is clear the chances of fomites is very, very unlikely. So you can handle it there. There is no need for gloves, wearing everything there. Suppose you touch something, we need to do hand rub. I am going to my COVID ward with just one N95 mask. I'm not doing anything more. I just go with my COVID ward with N95 mask, not even glove, not even gown, not even because I wear a spectacles, so I don't wear a face shield also there. I just go with my N95 mask and see the patients and come out. That's what I'm doing there. So what increases the risk of infections? Closed space or open space? Whether your environment has got a good air or window is there or not. And how many people are there? Whether what sort of activity, shouting, singing or something there, the chances of getting infection is very high. Particularly a closed OT environment, we need to adopt this model there. This is a closed one and a lot of people will be there, 6 to 8 people with the 150 to 300 square feet OT operation theater. Minimum 6 to 8 people will be there. The air will be circulated. So what we need to do, engineering control is more important. We need to have more fresh air, more air circulation that is needed, rather than keep on touching the surfaces and washing the thing there. We need to have a good air circulations. We need to have a big theater. Unnecessary person should not stay in a theater. Who is essential people, we can come and stay in the theater. Other person should move out of it. And during surgery, don't shout at your operating nurse there. That's most important thing. People say do it at open theater, open space. If you have got an open theater, that's fine, but people are not operating in open theater. Particularly my orthopedic surgeons doesn't want to operate in open theater. You people are comfortable there, but renal transplant surgeon, they don't want to do it. And similarly, orthopedic guys don't want to do it there. Fresh air is the most important thing. At least we can keep everything away. But what is more important, if you got window in your OP setting, this is for OP setting, he maintained a physical distance. He got a window. Unfortunately, the window was closed. Physical distance is fine. We need to keep this window open. That's most important thing. And the air should flow in this way. The air should come back from the doctor and it should go to the patients and go to the window. Suppose this person infected, if he cough and sneeze, it goes to the doctor, then it go to the window. But unfortunately, the window is also closed. If you keep closed the window, this much of virus is circulating. If you open the window, a lot of dilutions of the virus particle. So most important thing is air. That is why so far in farmer protests happening in open environment, there is no major outbreak. People are asking why there's no major outbreak in farmers protests, because of the open air, I can put it there. So window is a way for health. This is a OP setting. This is Sundara Medical Foundation's OP where I am sitting there and seeing patients. I got 2 windows. Even though the air is flowing behind me, at least 2 windows protecting me there. So this is where I'm sitting and seeing the patients in a good environment. It's a big broad room. This is where I'm consulting there, so I'm protected so far there. About the airborne transmission, a lot of confusions, droplet versus airborne. Now Lancet paper recently published last week, it is clear-cut airborne transmissions. If it is airborne transmissions, we need to wear N95 mask. We need not wear surgical mask because surgical mask will not protect 100%. N95 mask, particularly if you are going to deal with the COVID patients, it is going to give you a protection there. N95 mask wearing is a bit difficult. Surgical mask wearing is good, but N95 give a protection to you because it protects you there. That's clear about last week Lancet paper. It is airborne, no more droplet. When you're dealing with the COVID patients, wear N95 mask. If your contact time is more, wear N95 mask. That's most important thing there. And this is a useless thing. Last year we find out. In fact, I got a paper I'm presenting in ICMED this year, European Conference on Clinical Microbiology, later part of this month. So 45,000 screening I checked. Not even once it picked up. My conclusion, this is a useless procedure. So don't waste time on screening this one and checking it there. But most of the hospitals still following religiously. So whatever hospitals I'm entering, I'm bypassing this one and going there. The security fellow will look at me there. You are an infectious disease doctor, you're doing it there. Because I analyze my data, I know what is the role. So that's why I'm not doing it there. So COVID needs multiple levels of protection, not one level of protection. It needs multiple level of protection there. Physical distance, mask, and good ventilations. In addition, you need to have a good vaccines also that is going to protect you. But each one has got whole. Don't think I have taken a 2 doses vaccine, 2 weeks completed, I'm protected there. You are protected for going to ICU only there. You are not going to protect it with getting infection there. So keep in mind, it has got whole. Without holes, it's very difficult there. So now Israel is telling that they have vaccinated almost 60% of the populations. So people going for walking, there's no need for a mask because the transient exposure, opposite person come and hardly within 2 seconds you're going to cross the person there. So there is no need to wear a mask according to Israel. Israel is a country vaccinated most number of people there. They start vaccinating in November, December. Almost 60% of the population is completed. They're asking you can go for walk without mask. That's what they're telling there. What is the benefit for vaccinated people? The infection is bit less. If you're not vaccinated, the risk of infection is very high. Once you got infected, going to the ICU and hospital is very high there. So people still thinking about remdesivir. Remdesivir is not going to save your life. Vaccine is going to save your life. Keep in mind, vaccine is going to save your life there. The fear has come down compared to 2020, the 2021 wave 2, the fear is gone. But vaccinations, we need to steepen the curve so that we can flatten the curve faster. Unless you take the vaccine, it's a bit difficult there. We need to flatten the curve, but fear is lacking here. Previously, if you do Google search, adult vaccinations in India, this picture comes most of the time. Adults are giving vaccinations, polio vaccinations given by adults. This is according to Google in 2020. Adult vaccinations in India means adults are giving vaccinations. This is adult vaccinations in 2021. COVID changed the thing there. Doctors waited and taken the vaccinations for 2021. So adults are taking vaccines because of COVID there. Thanks to COVID, adult vaccination is picking up nowadays there. So anybody want to join as a co-founder with me, I'm welcome. I'm started a small startup there. This is educating the people and providing good care. I'm willing to take somebody to, anybody join with me as a co-founder is fine. Thanks for the opportunity. I think I overshooted my time. I'm happy to take a couple of questions there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Suresh. I think that was a very practical, and it shows that you have the experience and you've been going to hospitals and treating several patients. It has left us with a glimmer of hope also. So let me first start with one question which came to my mind after watching an NDTV show last night, where a leading epidemiologist from Canada, who was formerly with Sundaram Medical Foundation, Dr. Madhukar Pai, he said this the so-called triple mutant, the third variant, genomic testing is extremely important to identify the present strain. What are your views on that?
Definitely. India is lacking in that part. The genomic analysis, they started a bit late. How UK variant find out initially in November 2020, because UK routinely, before the variant start emerging, they check the genomic variant. Some other countries like Australia, some other countries has got excellent program. They started doing the genomic analysis, even though the second wave was not hit. India completely missed the bus. So we need to find out why the second wave is hitting so hard. We need to have the data. Unfortunately, the data is missing. We're talking about the third variant. A lot of multiple mutations is happening there. E484K, a lot of things is combining there. But we don't have a good data so far. Government has set up 10 genomic lab studies, but the data is very, very, very small there. So it's very difficult to comment right now because of the variant related effect there.
Yeah, so you're saying that genomic testing is required to identify the variants, but as a practical point, what does it mean to us? If you identify the variant, Is it going to induce changes in behavior or any medicines or any vaccine, or is it the same vaccine?
So far, the variants, there are three variants, has got very good data. One is a UK variant, second thing is a South African variant, and third is a Brazil variant. These are the three variants known with a good data. UK variant, what is the impact? It increases the infectiousness. For example, if one person infected, usually the wild strain will infect 2 persons, but the mutant or the variant increases to 4 persons there. Second thing, as far as death is concerned, there is no severity or no fatality there. Third thing, whether vaccine efficacy can go down, no. But South African variant, again, infectiousness is very high. Second thing, the vaccine efficacy. That's why South Africa returned our AstraZeneca vaccine to return back, because the efficacy has gone down. Fatalities are not there. Brazil variant, again, infections is very high. The efficacy is going down. Fatality also slightly high. So this is a data. Indian variants data is missing. Maybe another 3 to 6 months, government start writing the data. We need to find out the thing there.
Okay. Then one question is, if a person is already vaccinated with Covaxin or Covishield, is there any role of getting vaccinated with Pfizer and Moderna whenever they become available in India?
Right now, people are talking about the booster vaccinations. Even Pfizer and Moderna started producing booster vaccinations, because when Pfizer and Moderna introduced a vaccine, there is no variants or no knowledge of variants at that point of time. So right now, variants is emerging there. So they start preparing the booster shot right now to cover the variants also there. So for me, if you're taking Covishield and Covaxin, wait for 6 to 9 months, because the immunity is going to last for 6 to 9 months. When the immunity is going away, much data will emerge. That point of time, yes, you can take. Not hurriedly. May month it is going to available for Pfizer vaccine. So don't hurriedly start now taking it.
So that answers the question, how long does the immunity last after the second dose of vaccination? You
Somebody is
say,
raising the hand.
beg your pardon?
Somebody is raising the hand to answer some of the question there.
Dr. Suresh is excellent, fantastic talk. I just want to, you have not touched plasma. Role of plasma. Can transplant patient can receive plasma? Should immunosuppressive be stopped in transplant patient? These 2-3 things, because I just having a transplant patient, so I'm bombarding you with this question. Can plasma be given? Immunosuppressives need to be stopped, and how to go about with a transplant patient, 60-year-old doctor transplant patient onto immunosuppressive and having a COVID infection, who is on NIV, maintaining 90 to 92% of saturation on NIV.
So I have given the 3 interventions which is working: oxygen, DEXA, and tocilizumab. Other things is not working. Plasma, where it will work, within 3 days of onset of illness and the saturation dropping rapidly before your antibodies start forming. That point of time, if you give plasma, but most of the patients is not presenting that point of time. Within 3 days, most of the people are not crashing. But now in this wave 2, the crashing happening between day 5 to day 7, not even day 3. So the role of plasma within day 3, and the person's oxygen saturation is dropping suddenly, and they are presenting there, the role is there. In fact, in Tamil Nadu government, the Tamil Nadu government has stopped giving permission to use plasma. We participated in a large randomized control trial. It showed no benefit if you're giving after 7 days. So people are using this one. We are not using the plasma no more now.
Thank you, sir.
One question is, what is the risk of getting infected when you go for vaccination?
People are asking, this is the same questions. Even I am digging it there. In fact, in our ID groups are discussing, because Covaxin is a killed vaccine. It won't cause disease there. All killed vaccines, because a virus or bacteria is killed, it won't cause a disease there. Covishield, we have taken only that DNA particle. We have not taken the entire virus. We just taken one DNA particle that encodes the surface protein there. So that is going to multiply only the surface protein. So that is also essentially a killed one. This is not a live vaccine like your measles or chickenpox. Measles and chickenpox is a live vaccine. Sometimes even oral polio is a live vaccine. Sometimes it can cause a disease there, even though we change the structure, but sometimes it can go and cause a disease. But both Covishield, Covaxin and mRNA vaccines all were not a live one. Essentially, it is a killed one. So how the people are getting infected? So far, they're not got infected. Last year, with the peak and everything, nothing is happening. So what we postulating, this is a postulating only, that it's not a proven thing there. As you rightly pointed out, mostly people getting infected in the vaccination center, one. because of the time they spend is bit longer. They're getting observing for 30 minutes or 15 minutes one. That is why when I vaccinated, I told I go and sit in my car. I don't want to sit in the place there. I just go there and sit there. Whatever reactions, I'll come back to emergency. Don't worry about it. My car is hardly 2-3 minutes from your parking there. And second thing, what happened, most of the people after taking the first dose, some of the public, it's not doctors, some of the public, they started traveling immediately there. They started traveling immediately. They got some family functions, social gathering. They think the vaccine I have taken, they started doing it there. So these are all the two things there. Because of the closed environment, I told there is no open circulations. The air is keep on circulating. 50 people are sitting there together and a lot of air circulation. They are inhaling the thing. They are wearing honorary surgical masks and some people providing juices, coffee, tea. They are putting down the mask and having the coffee, tea, juices together there. This is a problem there.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point.
Suresh, one question in continuation of the word about the vaccines efficacy lasting for 6 to 9 months. So are we looking forward to a booster dose like the common influenza vaccine that each year we would require a booster dose for that virus of say 2021 this year?
The thought process is similar, sir. We need to have a booster doses. Right now, one booster, probably every year we need to take one shot. That's the thought process emerging. Pfizer and Moderna start producing booster dose vaccine there. They started preparing it. Trials also started for the booster dose.
Okay, one question is on, is it a good idea to reduce the number of personnel in your operating theater? And what happens to the residents' training? I mean, it's obvious that you have to restrict the number, but what happens to residents' training is something I think as urologists in academic institution is something we have to answer, and it's not a question for you. Okay. Anybody would like to give inputs? Keshav, Anil?
So what we are trying to do is to beam it to the auditorium, have only a limited number of guys inside who will be operating. The rest of the PGs who would want to observe or see will be beamed to the auditorium. They can sit there and see. That's one way of training them. But they would not get, all of them would not get an hands-on.
Ganesh sir, there are two hands raised. Dr. Shailesh and Dr. Sabir.
Yeah, Dr.
Shailesh wants to say something.
Yeah.
Harish?
Yeah, that's what I am trying to tell. Dr. Shailesh is asking practical questions, like you narrated very well the importance of windows in OPD. So it's summertime, temperature is more than 40 degrees most of the days in Ahmedabad and nearby places. So is it wise to keep on AC and see the patient, or operation room operating, or we should keep windows open? What is the practical advice from you?
So as far as the OP is concerned, it's easy. You can keep your AC, air conditioners. Even in fact, I got an air conditioners in my room there. It is on the top of my head there. It physically separates. The air is blowing exactly between me and patient. What I did, I am sitting here. My patient is sitting opposite side. This is a FC unit sitting on my head, separating physically. The air is blowing. It creates an air curtain to me and patient there. That's a simple. I don't put any glass window. I just put the air on the top. It creates an air curtain between me and the patient. That's what I did it. In operation theater windows, in fact, we check the data there because some of the Western world, they're doing with the open windows. That's what they're telling it there. But in Indian Kabad, whether the air is polluted, whether the air you're going to save, whether you're going to get, that's only concern. The Western world, the pollution is bit less. Yes, they can open the windows and then operate there. But in Indian part, how far it's going to be effective, we discuss in our groups there, but there's no solution yet there.
I have a question on the same line.
Wants to ask.
Dr. Shailesh is asking.
Yeah, wants to ask.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, Shailesh sir. You're on.
Can I speak now?
Go ahead, please.
Yes. Please, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Yeah. Thank you for the reply you have given. Now, what you said clearly that urologists are ready to operate unlike orthopedic surgeon in open place. And you are confirming that there are enough data that when the air is moving, the infection rate is less. Then why you are hesitating to recommend that operation theater windows should be open?
Because most of the hospitals, operation theater is shared by different specialties there. So when you operate general surgeons and for urologists, it's not a big mega question there. Even general surgeon, obstetricians, and the urologists, there is no issues there. But the same theater, cardiothoracic surgeon, neurosurgeons, and orthopedic surgeons, they are very reluctant to operate there.
But how many theaters have openable windows? My theater doesn't have openable windows.
Hardly any.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The modern
that's the
operating
problem.
theaters, there are no opening windows because it's a
Correct.
positive pressure ventilation. That is the whole crux of the air conditioning.
You can't have a
Correct.
One more question.
Dr.
Dr.
Sabir,
Suresh,
Dr. Sabir wants to ask a question. I see his hands raised for quite some time. Dr. Shabir Patel.
Ji sir. Good evening, sir. Dr. Sabir Patel, sir, working as a factory medical officer, sir. I have two questions. Role of Fabiflu, Favipiravir, and when person comes negative in RT-PCR after positive, sir, when should we allow him to join the duty? That after coming negative, the person can still transmit the disease.
Both are easy one. There, Fabiflu, there is no data. Even though they claim there is an antiviral medication, there is no data. We need to have a good
Hello?
randomized control trial. We need to have a good randomized control trial to generate a data for Fabiflu. That was not conducted by the manufacturers or the drug one. So till the data is not there, I cannot recommend it. Second thing regarding your questions for factory people joining back. What I am doing for my healthcare personals, once they got infected, most of the time we are not testing also there. Most of them are young nurses or young doctors there. They got positive. The symptoms is classic there. I asked them to go for an isolation there. By day 7, most of the period or infections is not there. I asked them to come back on day 10. We are not testing again. Even sometimes the first time also we are not testing. Don't get panic and don't get unnecessary harassment from the government. So go stay isolated from you. 10 days back, come back and join, provided there is no symptom for the last 24 to 48 hours, no fever, there is no temperature, able to heat well, they can come back and join on day 10. This is a rule we are doing for the patients also. Admitted, proven, we are not repeating the test on day 10. I'm moving from COVID ward to non-COVID ward.
Okay,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
could I ask a question, Ganesh?
Yeah, go ahead.
Suresh, steroids remain the backbone of treatment for patients who are hospitalized. So, two questions. Is there a difference between different steroids like dexamethasone, prednisolone, solumedrol? And which is the most optimum time and when do we hit them hard with steroids?
Yes, usually the data is good for dexamethasone. Some of the small studies showing methylprednisolone is also equivalent to dexamethasone. What the studies are showing, the dexamethasone 6 milligram dose is an adequate dose. For that, you can use any steroids. Like for example, methylprednisolone is equivalent dose of dexamethasone 6 milligram is 32 milligram. But the problem is most of the intensive care and most of the physicians, what they're using 125 milligram TDS, 125 milligram BD, 250 milligram loading doses there. The equivalent dose of methylprednisolone to dexamethasone 6 milligram is 32 milligram. If you are increasing to 8 milligram, it comes around 40 milligram there. That is a dose we need to use for methylprednisolone. So, but unfortunately, we are using high doses. For high doses, very few data is there. Very small data is available, particularly for 3 to 5 days. But most of the ICU, when the person's oxygen saturation is not coming up, they keep on pushing the same dose for 10 to 15 days. That's why mucormycosis is happening most of the time in wave 1. What is an ideal time? When the person starts desaturating, when the saturation drops from 94 to 93 or 92, 94, 93, 92, the person not able to walk, not able to complete the sentence. If you give the spirometry, he's not able to raise 3 balls, it's falling down to 1 ball or 2 balls. That point of time, start the dose. That's the ideal time. Don't start on day 1 because day 1 to day 7, the viral load is maximum. If you give steroids, definitely it'll disseminate the viral load. So don't give for first 5 to 7 days unless the saturation is dropping. If saturation is dropping,
that was my concern because the concept is not to give it in the first 5 days, but we can't help it if the saturation is dropping at that time. So we risk viremia even in the first 5 days if the saturation is dropping.
No, if the saturation is dropping on day 5, that's fine. You can give at least some evidence it is stopping there. But when the saturation is maintaining on day 5, most of the physicians they give methylprednisolone or dexamethasone as a tablet or injection. That's the problem there. So unless the saturation is maintaining well, don't touch dexamethasone.
Thank you.
Suresh, on the same question, now steroids are given effectively for the cytokine storm to alleviate the effects of a cytokine storm. So are there predictors of a cytokine storm when we can start the steroid?
Yes, some of the predictors are there, but it's not 100% false proof for me there. For example, last time in wave 1, wave 2, there is no good predictor for me so far because I have not looked in the data. Wave 2, just we are completing 15-20 days there. We need to go back and see what is happening in wave 2 there. Wave 1, the predictors are above the age of 60. If your CRP is elevated more than 4 times the upper limit and your CPK is very high, creatine phosphokinase that indicate diffuse body pain or myalgia is there, and very high elevated ferritin. So these are all the prognostic markers along with the red cell distribution. With these are all the NLC ratio. Some of the people are putting it there. We don't rely on IL-6 there. So these are all the prognostic marker. Above the age of 60, comorbid conditions, 2 or 3 comorbid conditions, plus male 6. Females are better compared to the male. So male 6 is a worse prognosis. Above the age of 60, 2 or 3 comorbid conditions, plus elevated CRP. These are all the 4 best predictors for cytokine storm.
Sir, at present, is there any drug recommended for prophylaxis? Earlier it was SCQ, ivermectin. What is the current status? And my second question, I'm linking with it. Patient, 45-year-old male diagnosed with active genitourinary tuberculosis. So his question was, when can I get vaccinated? So I thought that I'll club these 2 questions to you, sir.
The second part I was not able to clear that. The first part, there is no prophylactic drugs so far because treatment itself, oxygen, dexamethasone, and tocilizumab. We are not giving Fabiflu, we are not giving ivermectin, we are not giving azithro, doxy, nothing is there. Only thing, couple of molecules we are trying. One is Budecort we are trying nowadays, colchicine we are trying, and fluoxamine. That is a trial basis we are using it there. As far as prevention is concerned, last week on data is published, monoclonal antibody. What former US President has received as a treatment that can be given as a prevention therapy for people who are exposed. If you're given as exposed people, it can prevent the disease. That's what they're giving a trial. Regeneron, that's what former president of US, he got it as a treatment, but that can be given as a prophylaxis that can prevent them getting disease. That's what the data is showing there. Second part, what is the vaccinations? I'm not able to clear, sir.
Patient is diagnosed with genitourinary tuberculosis.
Okay.
So he's an active disease. When can he get vaccinated?
No timeline. We can take immediately. If he's eligible, take it. There's no problem with genitourinary TB.
Okay, sir. Thank
Dr.
you.
Shailesh?
Yeah.
Dr. Shailesh,
Yes.
go ahead, please.
Hello. Hello. Am I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Ganesh. I
Yeah, go
had a
ahead.
question for him that in Gujarat, large number of physicians, ophthalmologists, and some other doctors have used methylene blue in a patient who are having a bad situation. They give IV methylene blue, otherwise 0.1%, 1 ml BID methylene blue, and it is used as a intranasal spray also. So what is the role of methylene blue? And a group of doctors in Surat who had come to Chennai, so they also suggest that nothing else works, but 0.1%, 1 ml methylene blue twice a day sublingually works very well as a prophylactic for a doctor who are treating a lot of COVID patients. So is there anything which our doctor is suggesting like this, or it should not be recommended?
So far, there is no good RCT there. Indian doctors are claiming it there, but there is no RCT conducted. Conducting an RCT in Indian setup is difficult. We know our personal experiences shows little bit of effect, but we are not using it there. Some of the ID colleagues from your part, Gujarat, like Sterling Hospital, we got a couple of colleagues there. We checked them. They are not using the ID colleagues in Gujarat part, Ahmedabad. They are not using it there. My colleagues are there. They are not using in IV methylene blue. Some of the intensive care physicians, they are trying desperate situations, vitamin C, and this one they are trying it there, but there is no good data. People are using has got only small retrospective. They are saying, I use for this number of people, it is showing benefit. But for recommendations, we need to have a good RCT. It is not happening so far.
It's quite clear that there are so many home remedies which are all anecdotal that you can't really attach values to those and can't generalize. There's one more study which says indomethacin, microcid, is useful. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, indomethacin, ivermectin, still it's not ruled out completely there. But unfortunately, people are not fast tracking the studies there. That's why this time we started, but how far it's going to, I do not know. We started checking these 3 molecules right now: the fluoxamine, colchicine, and butyrate. We are checking that budesonide. Sorry, budesonide we are trying right now. Other things we are not checking right now there.
Dr. Suresh, so once RT-PCR is positive or rapid antigen test is positive, and people are rushing like mad to get injection remdesivir, but you very clearly said that it has no role. So in your practice, is there any specific indications where we have scientific data to suggest that it can work in a selected group of patients?
Actually, we analyzed last time also that what is our conclusion is when the person has got high risk for progression to cytokine storm above the age of 60, male sex with a lot of comorbid conditions with very high CRP, and some people had it with a very high CT score also. Put together score crosses more than 9 or 10. We got some score, 4C score we call that. The 4C score is there. On day 1, day 2, they are presenting there because the viral load is maximum on day 1 to day 5 there. In a yearly window, they are presenting. The risk of cytokine storm is very high. We can give theoretically the remdesivir, but unfortunately, right now the remdesivir shortage is more. So we are keeping for people who are hypoxic. We are combining with dexamethasone for a little bit of hypoxic patient there. This one we tried when the wave is coming down. We can do that small population there. People, we think progression to cytokine storm is there and presenting yearly with the risk factors. Yes, you can give even outpatient remdesivir because of the bed availability is a challenge, and we are keeping the people that point of time we can use it. Yes, we can give outpatient therapy.
So it's very limited indications. Then how did it become the drug of fashion during this COVID second wave?
WhatsApp and Facebook.
Dr. Suresh, we have not heard about Clexane in your talk about this antithrombotic and antiplatelet therapy. You have not touched it.
Yeah. Again, Clexane, I have not mentioned it there, but Clexane has got low molecular weight heparin or heparin we can give it, usually as a prophylactic dose. People who got moderate hypoxia, ideally the patient who require a little bit of oxygen, he need to be hospitalized. Unfortunately, most of the hospitals are occupied by the VVIP requiring positive, they want to occupy the bed. That kind of patients, we don't want to give the Clexane or heparin there. What is the population needed? Moderate hypoxia, where the low oxygens and patients is going to be bedridden or patient is not movable there because of desaturation. So while they're walking there, they're bedridden and the D dimer is elevated and the patient is going to stay in a bed for next 3 to 5 days. That point of time, prophylactic dose. Usually want to give a low dose rather than high dose. Previously, we used to give 0.6 ml and 0.8 ml there. 1 mg per kg of the body weight we have started. But nowadays, we come down to only 0.4 ml as a prophylactic dose. When the person is completely bedridden, for example, ventilated NIV patients with a very high D dimer, treatment dose we are giving with little bit higher doses there.
How long? How long?
How important you feel is prone? Sorry.
Usually till the discharge we are giving, as far as possible, we are giving the low molecular weight heparin there. And some people still continue to be hypoxic. We are sending with oxygen. That point of time converting into oral anticoagulants there.
Thank you, sir.
How important do you think is prone nursing?
Prone nursing there.
Yeah, for who are hypoxic.
So a lot of controversy with the proning also there. According to ICU colleagues, previously they told proning is the way forward to reduce the oxygenation there. But still we are following the awake proning. For people who are requiring a little bit of 93, 94 people, we are doing awake proning. When the people is awake itself, they do the prone. It improves the oxygenations. But ICU doctors still continuing to do proning for a ventilated patients. When the oxygen requirement is not improved with standard techniques, they are still doing the proning there.
So is it helping the patient in real terms? Is proning helping the patient in real terms?
No, it increases transiently. It increases hypoxia level. The SpO2 can go from 92 to 95 or something there.
Yeah,
but real-time effect is not there. Usually, that's why the controversy started. Previously, people thought it really improved the lung outcome there. But what is shown, it's transiently it increases a saturation level, not a long-term benefit there.
In fact, this is what is
Dr.
recommended.
Yeah, Dr. Suresh, one practical question for surgeons. Like, what is the cutoff point for CT value after COVID in an asymptomatic patient to go for surgery safely so that he or she cannot infect the other people?
So, there are two things as far as the surgery is concerned there. we don't go with the cycle threshold. Previously, people told cycle threshold less than 30, the chances of infections is not there. Infections is very high. More than 30, the infection risk is less there. You can go ahead. But now the cycle threshold concept is also going away. So what I'm telling is, there are two things. If you are wearing a N95 mask and your operation theater is good, air circulation is there, yes, you can go ahead. You can protect it there, one. But as far as the patient is concerned, there are two things why we don't want to do the surgery for a COVID positive patients. One, because of risk of getting infected. Second thing, the risk of getting complications following the post-COVID there. So which population is going for it? People are going for general anesthesia. The chances of going for post-operative complications is a bit high. Both thromboembolism as well as severe pneumonia is possible there. As far as urology is concerned, if you are operating with a spinal anesthesia, if it is really an emergency surgery, yes, you can go ahead with the local or spinal anesthesia. Fine, that's good thing there. General anesthesia is a problem there. But nowadays, the second wave started from April, even the person is not infected, post-operative, they are getting nosocomial COVID. That's a problem there. You done a good surgery. The person has come out of a surgery, but unfortunately, he's getting a nosocomial COVID from other patients or from healthcare persons who are not vaccinated, or the relatives, friends visiting the patients. They are transmitting them. They are getting a secondary pneumonia and secondary problem there.
I have one
So-
question which is very pertinent as far as residents are concerned. In our own hospital, we noticed young residents were diffident on taking vaccination because of fertility issues. In the second wave, a lot of them have fallen sick. What are your thoughts on that?
So compared to the residents, we feel this problem in nurses. Most of the nurses, why they refuse to take the vaccination, say that one of the family member strongly told them this causes infertility. Where they got it, I do not know. What's up only again there. So that's a big challenge for the nurses. But among the doctors, slowly they started, because they start realizing now, they start seeing the benefit of the vaccinated people compared to the non-vaccinated people. They're slowly changing nowadays. Only the young female residents who are planning pregnancy or who are planning for breastfeeding or something, that they are reluctant to take the vaccination, that I'm breastfeeding, I'm planning to pregnancy, I'm getting married. This type of comments is happening with the young residents who are planning something there. But otherwise, most of the other doctors, they are taking it up there. So there's no issues there. But nurses is a big challenge. Nurses is a big challenge. This is the main reason they're not taking it.
I think education is important.
I think
No other cause.
for pregnancy, it is still contraindicated.
Usually it's a case-by-case basis. In fact, when healthcare workers were recommended in US, almost more than 30,000 women who are pregnant or who are planning pregnancy or early stages pregnancy, late stages pregnancy, they're taken mRNA vaccines. Even Covishield, they put pregnancy as a contraindications, but all killed vaccines. For example, we are giving tetanus toxoid during pregnancy. We are giving hepatitis B vaccine during pregnancy. So there's no contraindications, real contraindications, particularly when the first trimester is over. When organogenesis has been completed, we can give the killed vaccine. There's no contraindication there.
What's the value of a HEPA filter?
HEPA filter will filters more of funguses there, but yes, it filters, it sucks whatever bacteria and viruses are circulating, but HEPA will filter the viruses part, but more for fungal infections, to prevent fungal infections in ICU, particularly bone marrow transplant settings, as well as for joint surgeries, as it may help out there because of the infection risk is there. Otherwise, for a general purification purpose, it's not going to help out. Normal air exchanges in the theater is more, that's fine, sir.
Okay, are there any further questions or Harish?
Yeah, I was surprised when last week I came across that one of my relatives was asked not to have steam inhalation for COVID, and that was advised by one qualified, reputed physician. Is there any scientific contraindication in COVID patient not to have steam inhalation?
As my moderator told, a lot of home remedies, people are claiming it there. No data. If there's some sore throat or some nose block, some steam inhalation always gives some relieving effect there. But it won't prevent corona. It won't cure corona. It just gives some symptomatic relief to people there.
But no
But there's a
contraindication.
question-
No contraindication.
There's a question in the chat box. Should we measure and when should we measure this antibody levels after vaccination?
Usually second week after the vaccinations, we can measure. 2 doses completed, 2 weeks is over. Check, but it will give total antibody. We are not sure because antibody is there, because we have seen people with antibody. Even one shot, people develop antibody there. Before vaccination, zero. After one shot, they develop antibody, but still they are getting infected. So don't go away with antibody alone. I've got antibody, I'm free there. Even with antibody, people are developing it there. So because we are measuring only total antibody, in the total antibody, neutralizing type of antibody to the spike protein RBD domain is going to productions. That is, there is no test available to measure that part.
So we don't have anything to measure spike protein, right? Right now we don't.
Some of the labs claiming it there, but if you discuss with the microbiology colleagues there, they are telling what the method suggested to find out the antibody. It is not available as a what do you call practicing tool. It's a research tool only. It's available there. It's not a practicing microbiology lab cannot check the thing there.
Why
More
some bodies are
research.
not developing antibodies after 2 to 4 weeks? Why it is so? Why the response is so varied? Some are having antibody. Even I got COVID. When I went to donate plasma, my antibody levels were quite low. I was positive for almost a month. So why this different response of people who are developing, some are very high antibodies, some even not developing antibodies after vaccination, sir? Why is so much variation of population?
There is no clear-cut answer for the thing there. We have seen also up to 100% people are recovering from the antibody, recovering from the COVID. When we ask for the antibody, as you rightly point out, 90 to 95% of the people producing antibody. If you check the antibody, that's positive. Some people has got in the family of 4 or 5. Some people with mild infection, they got very high antibody. According to the scientific data, people who got severe COVID, the chances of antibody mounting is very high. People who got minimal COVID, the antibody response is not that great. That's what I can say. But if you see some of the people, mild or asymptomatic, their antibody response is skyrocket. On the other hand, people was in ICU, stayed for quite some time. Despite the thing, when you check the antibody, it's very low level, sometimes negative also it is there. That's also we are seeing it. There's no explanations. But once you got COVID, the chances of second COVID, 95% it don't happen. Even though your B cells is not producing an antibody, T cells will protect you there.
Sir, here is a medical professor who got COVID last year. He got 2 vaccines. He still admitted his own hospital with COVID. So I don't know how COVID behaves, which logic and which science it follows.
No, following vaccination, yes, sir, but following infection, there are very few people got infected. Again, recurrent infections, reinfection is hardly 1% to me there. Common infections, reinfection is hardly 1 to 2%. Following vaccinations, we got a data there. But following a true infections, even though people say 6 to 9 months, your immunity can going down. But so far, because from April onwards, we are seeing now a 1 year approach there. Hardly I have seen last time affected people. Hardly I can count the numbers of the people who came and met me following the infection there.
But Karnataka Chief Minister had a second infection.
So what? Hardly we can count few people there. That's what.
I don't know whether it is a proven infection or RT-PCR, because does RT-PCR give false positives?
Some of the people they claim, for example, before surgery, it's routinely there. Absolutely no symptoms. One day they do the RT-PCR positive. They got very annoyed there. No, I don't have any symptoms. I don't believe the lab. They're checking in other lab. That can be negative there. So technically, yes, depends upon the lab quality as well as how they're processing it there. The problem is some of the private labs, they cut down the cost there. They want to cut down the cost. They do the pooling. 5%, 6%, they're pulling it there. Suppose 1% positive, they're reporting as positive for everybody there. That is a problem. That is the issue they're talking about. Pooling can cause a problem. If pool is positive, we need to check individually. But some of the microbiology labs there, because of the cost constraint, they pool and they positively report they're doing it there. ICMR is not recommending it, but still some of the labs cutting the cost for the swab, for the PCR, they're cutting the cost and doing this one there.
Yeah, but that's completely unethical, right? You can't pool the results together. You can pool different issues, but
you can pool the test. You can pool the test. If it is negative, that's fine. But if it is positive, we need to do the individual test and find out who is the culprit there. But unfortunately, they're not doing it there.
That's wrong.
I think Ganesh, we have completed our time.
Okay, Dr. Suresh, thanks a lot for answering all those questions. You have spent a lot of useful time with us, and we are very, very grateful to you. I now hand over to Dr. Keshav to proceed with closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh, for spending your evening with us. It was a good talk, a very good talk, crisp and to the point answers. We were enlightened by your practical points, and I hope all the USI members would also have benefited with it. We have a lot of questions. Maybe we'll pass it on to Ganesh, who can get us some answers if necessary. So if Arun Chavala is there, Arun can give his closing remarks. Arun, you are there?
Yes, sir, I am there, sir. But only thing which I can compliment is the excellent and very, very nice talk by Dr. Suresh. My wife, who is in microbiology and is running the COVID lab, and she acknowledged that she has not listened to such a clear concept right from the basic to the vaccination. Such a nice talk by Dr. Suresh. Thank you, Dr. Suresh, from my end and from my wife's side also, and her also colleagues were also joined 15-20 minutes once you started the talk. Thank you, Dr. Keshav, and thanks all the viewers for joining us for the webinar. Over to you, Dr. Keshav.
Yeah, thanks all of you for joining, and I thank the office, Navneet and Kiran Arora, for helping us in this. So thank you all. We take leave of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Keshav, sir. Thank you, USI.
Thank you so much, sir.
Good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and good night.